Now. Perfect. So I'm very excited to introduce Jerrold McGrath, who will be speaking to us about New Not Normal, a community-generated mapping project. So Jerrold is the managing director at UKAI Projects and founder at Ferment AI. He focuses on cross-sector collaborations around issues of broad social concerns such as artificial intelligence, equity in response to COVID-19, hope and hopelessness, and the digital diaspora. So I'll stop sharing now and I'll hand it over to you, Jerrold.
Thank you very much. This is great. I'm feeling very welcomed here, and thanks for having me. I'm not sure exactly what people's interests will be, so I'm just going to sort of walk through the project and create some space for questions at the end. I just want to be very, very upfront that this was a collective project, and so if there are questions about elements of it, I may not be able to answer them now, but I can certainly reach out to the folks that contributed to find out. So just to begin, I discovered last year, and I should say I wrote some notes for this as well, so I'll be referring to them as we go, but I discovered last year that my family was partly responsible for the Matheson fire of 1916, which for those of you who aren't familiar, it is the largest man-made fire in North American history. Destroyed 500,000 acres of forest, killed over 200 people. And it turns out that my family, they were settlers and they were clearing brush using fire in July during a heat wave. And some of the fires connected up together and led to this massive conflagration. The people, so the damage to Indigenous communities was less well reported, but we understand that it was quite severe as well. Now, after the fire, my family surveyed what remained, and then they started walking south, eventually getting picked up by the train and settling in southern Ontario, and some of the family moved into the US and elsewhere. So my ancestors felt no attachment to the land that sustained them. And one of my beliefs in this work is that when we are alienated from our landscapes, from our bodies, from our cultures, we become capable of doing great harm. The Anishinaabe people, following the Matheson fire, they rebuilt. A lot of the settlers did not. And so a lot of the work that we're trying to do is an effort to contribute to the rebuilding of the homes and the land that sustains me. Following this crisis that we're currently in, and of course, those inevitably to come, and based on the news from the western side of North America, are currently underway. So my name is Jerrold McGrath. I'm the managing director at UKAI Projects, as mentioned, and do work with the Goethe Institute Toronto as well. I'm also the volunteer with something called the MyTree platform, which is a global network of folks addressing inequality in response to COVID-19, with a particular focus in East Africa, India, and other areas that are traditionally underserved. So all of this work is anchored in a number of ideas, and I want to sort of just outline them briefly to sort of inform the philosophy or ideology that went into the project. And the reason I'm doing this is because some of them aren't particularly fashionable at the moment, so they may not be, anyway, I think it's just good to detail them. So the first thing with UKAI is we're really interested in the balance between ordering and disordering forces. I'm a fan of a gentleman named Ivan Illich. He was a Roman Catholic priest, but he was excommunicated for arguing against the use of schools to change the behavior of South American and Central American Indigenous communities, also because he was an anarchist. But turns out he actually wasn't excommunicated, but he had believed that he was. And so he argues that Western institutions represent a corruption of the Christian church's greatest strength. And I don't belong to any church in particular, but I find Illich's ideas compelling. So he argued that the early church's greatest innovation was to give individuals the capacity to turn toward whomever they chose, to extend love or compassion or care. Where once local traditions sort of dictated who was our neighbor and who was not, the early church, according to Illich, provided the capacity for what he called grace. And so over time, however, he argues that we started turning to institutions to take care of those in need, to police our behavior, to educate our children. And perhaps we've gone too far the other way. We see someone in pain and we are assured that it is someone else's job to take care of them. And so we can keep walking and we lose our personal and individual ability to turn toward others or not. So this is one of the motivating forces in the work. The second is we're really interested in multiple voices and perspectives engaging with each other in real time. If we want to make sense of the world around us, we can't be reducing things down or condensing things down. We have to embrace the underlying complexity of being alive. Digital platforms seem to prefer monologic approaches. On one side, we have sort of a dogmatism where different opinions just inspire anger or outrage. And on the other, we get this kind of relativism where all positions are potentially valid, so we don't need to talk about it. Like dialogue is unnecessary almost by definition. In our work, we try to assemble like kind of structures of meaning that invite multiple worldviews to come into dialogue without having to sort of give up or subsume one's views to a shared position or compromised position. So that's the second. And then the third is we favor sense making aimed at the real. So we try to emphasize the assembling of meaning from concrete lived activity and utterances rather than abstractions or measurements alienated from underlying experiences. Western thought loves measuring, loves alienating, loves abstracting, and those approaches have brought a lot of progress, but they've also created a lot of harm. So I use the example like it's valuable to know about fire, but there are also lessons to be learned from being burned or learning to cook. And so we're more interested in the being burned or cooking rather than the learning about. It's important to care about things, but equally important to care for them. So I'm just going to share now, and then we'll jump into the project. Okay, so this is Ferment. This is the team that put together New Not Normal. Ferment is a long-term residency. People basically arrive and leave as they choose. Some stay for a very long time, over 3 years in some cases, and some stay for weeks, and that's sort of how we like it. These folks here are some of the members of the Ferment community. In April 2020, we watched alongside many others as the COVID-19 virus spread across the globe. Maps were frequently deployed to visualize its advance, and we became curious about other forms of response. So we came together to try to figure out our own response to the crisis, and I had my own ideas that I brought to this group, and thankfully the process of debate and discussion generated better ideas, none of which were mine. So thankfully, we got to a good place. There were no funders interested in this initially, and the timelines were rapid. So we drew on our internal resources and volunteering, and I'll explain a little bit about the UBI later as well. And over 10 of us contributed in different ways to building this New Not Normal out. Essentially, this is an example. It's a community-generated mapping project. We were inspired by querying the map and acknowledge a huge debt to that just amazing and beautiful project. We tried to build it without any cookies at all, but eventually had to include one to prevent automated posting, which only became a concern when the site became popular. We set a timer on posts from unique IP addresses. We got free database support from Airtable, which was great. And what you can do is you go and folks can choose a nugget. We call them nuggets, these nuggets of emotional color. And I'll actually, I don't know if this will work, but hopefully this works. So you can see the map in progress here. So you can place a nugget on the map, and then a little note explaining how you are feeling. The responses are completely anonymous. Actually, there's no way to include information about yourself at all, which removes some of the performative aspects of this type of project that can come up. And we were quite surprised, actually, by the amount of attention and traffic we got. So if you just kind of click around, here we have a nugget of fear. We're at just over 1,500 posts right now.
Jerrold, I
sorry,
don't
please.
see the map. I just see your slides.
Oh, I see what's happened. All right, so we'll do this, and then we'll do this again. There we go. Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Beautiful. Louisville, Kentucky. I'm happy and safe with my mama and little brother in the middle of the ocean. Oh, dada in the middle of the ocean. I'm unsure, lonely. We get a lot of lonelies. What will emerge from this? More fear, more divides, or empathy and togetherness. God knows what is about to come. We did that one already. The Spanish ones are particularly emotional, which is wonderful. There's a lot of cursing. So yeah, we also made it possible for folks in other places to share how they were addressing the emotions we were reading on the map. So from Hong Kong to Newfoundland, here's the Newfoundland project. This is a sort of a yarn bombing project that someone set up in a community called Twillingate, which is a small town right on the east coast of Newfoundland. This is the artist here. The Hong Kong project. Oops. It's the grocery, which is a one-stop culture shop. And we have about a dozen of these in here as well. There we go. So an artist in Washington State, since the start of this project, she's chosen 100 of the nuggets, and she's painting a unique watercolor piece for each of them and then posting them every day. She's up to number 86 right now, or 87, I believe. And it's a real treat for the team to watch those being created. There was a project in the UK, another in Ireland, and another in, I'm trying to remember where, maybe Mexico, where they borrowed some of the ideas from here. And of course, we credited where we borrowed the ideas from as well, in order to generate something similar. Now, in time, we started to be able to offer residencies where we brought in artists and creators who were interested in addressing different aspects of the emotions that were being surfaced through the map. Sorry, I'm just going to share this up again. All right, here's one from Ghana, God Protect Ghana. And then this is one of the funnier Spanish ones here for those who speak Spanish. Basically an angry ask that people behave a little more responsibly. So in time, we were able to run some residencies. We ran 3 residencies through the platform. One of them here is migration, which is this. The slide is basically a mess, but this was our social media collateral. And I'll just explain briefly what this was about. During the pandemic, arts organizations have been asked to take their work online. But of course, a lot of the tools for translating work online and a lot of the platforms available online assume a Western European or commercial orientation to the work. So we worked with some partners, including the Nagata Shachu Taiko Ensemble, Nova Dance, which is a South Asian dance company. We ended up working with 13 organizations who were working in culturally specific non-Western performance. And then we connected them to 28 creative technologists who worked with them over a 1-month sprint to develop approaches to honoring the integrity of their work while migrating it into digital platforms. So the Taiko Ensemble project, there was a haptic feedback suit that was developed that allowed people to actually feel the drum in their chest as it was being played virtually. Nova Bhattacharya and Nova Dance, they ended up doing camera-based work. So Bharatanatyam is a dance tradition in India where the different gestures, there's a vocabulary, there's a meaning behind them. And people could practice gestures and then they would get feedback on what they were basically saying through the response. And so the intention was to provide different ways of translating this culturally specific work into digital platforms so that folks who didn't see themselves online would have opportunities to engage with culture that reflected their own experiences of the world. Now, a lot of these later projects, the residencies, involved some funding and money coming in, but prior to that, we didn't have any funds to draw on, so we drew on our own internal resources, and we set up a system where Ferment members, sorry, go to the next page, whether they contributed to New Not Normal or not, could invoice privately and get paid whatever they needed whenever they needed it. It wasn't an ideal solution because it still had a centralized component, and we're going through a process now of decentralizing some of these decisions. I mean, it wasn't a decision, but decentralizing the process by which payment occurred. Folks could share their struggles, or they could choose not to. We just didn't want anyone to feel obligated to sort of perform their difficulty during the pandemic period, or at least that period when this work was happening, because obviously it's still ongoing. Either way, we wanted to ensure that folks would be able to meet their needs, and so we got some good response on that. And I won't talk about the uptake, but we were happy to be able to help people. Now, I have no idea what kind of oh, and sorry, this here is the current site, newnormal.ukai.ca, that I'll put in the chat. All of the residencies, we asked the artists to share their reflections on the process of working through the challenges. And now you can go in and see written posts, sketches, videos from the artists about their process of creation. And the New Not Normal at the top left is the link back to the map itself. Now, I have no idea what kind of impact we've had. We don't monitor traffic numbers. We can see our data usage through our provider, and there's been some exceptionally busy days. We were featured in Creative Mornings in their global sort of newsletter that went out, I think it was monthly or weekly, and that led to a huge spike in nuggets being added. And by Mayaken in Hong Kong, which brought in some traffic, and then again by a Mexican partner who shared the workout, and we got a lot of responses through that as well. Now, I'm proud of this project for many reasons, and I want to just sort of call back to what I talked about at the start to sort of explain why. First, we tried to center the idea of mutual aid and support. We provided a place for people to share anonymously how they felt, and then tried to support creators and artists by hosting or through residencies to respond. So people were given the opportunity to turn toward others and support them based on the emotions they were seeing surface through the map. Secondly, we didn't try to develop a consensus or even a summary. There are happy nuggets, sad nuggets, angry nuggets, boring everyday nuggets. Each is poetic and true and does nothing to diminish the nugget next to it, which might be expressing something quite different. Some of the nuggets were in dialogue with each other. Folks could respond to nuggets on the map by placing their own nugget right next to it, but they would never know if the original author would see it, or if anyone would see it for that matter. And finally, the map wasn't about fire, but the experience of being burned. And in some cases, the experience of cooking. At UKAI, we worry about living in times where people prefer simple stories. Seeing the map completely saturated, and I'll go back to the map again just to share the blobs. There. So when you see the map completely covered, I think there's over 1,550 nuggets on the map now. We can feel overwhelmed by the task of making sense of it all, or we can enjoy the process of browsing through, getting momentary glimpses into the lives of strangers. The danger of getting back to normal is that each of us experiences that normal in our own way. And the Ferment team hope to capture the mess and to make it available for others to enjoy and contribute. And I hope that others will add their nuggets as well. So that's the sort of a broad summary of the project. Yeah, and happy to respond to any questions that people might have.